Frid och vänner och välkomna till en uppdatering härifrån Åhléns då. Israel är ensamt och isoleras efter att de brutalt attackerades i oktober 2023. Man skulle ju ha trott att världen skulle samlas på hennes sida. Nej då. Inte ens Amerika nu kan man lita på, som alltid har stått allierad på Israels sida. Så något är det som händer i världen, vänner. Nu håller USA tillbaka till och med vapen och andra reservdelar och spionageutrustningar som Israel behöver till satelliter och alla såna här informationsgrejer. Håller man tillbaka. Internationella brottsdomstolen ville arrestera Benjamin Netanyahu i maj bara för att han försvarade sitt eget land. Emot Israel har EU visat sig, FN, World Economic Forum och den internationella brottsdomstolen. Och även flera andra enskilda länder har alla fördömt den lagligt, demokratiskt upprättade judiska staten. Bara för att man ville rensa Gaza från terrororganisationen Hamas. Kom ihåg en sak nu när ni tittar runt över världen. Det som händer nu övergår faktiskt allt sunt förnuft och är andligt. Israel är isolerat av världen och förföljd, men Gud är på hennes sida och det är huvudsaken. Om ni har följt våra nyhetsrapporteringar angående alla de här väldiga översvämningarna som har drabbat världen, så kanske ni har lagt märke till en sak. Det finns de som har skrivit böcker till och med om det här. Att när man har gått emot Israel som land så har det drabbats av väldigt märkliga saker, och det sker nu också. Vi har ett klipp här i slutet med lite naturkatastrofer som har hänt, och det här lär ju bara vara början då. För vi tror väl att vi har gått in i en fas nu som skulle kunna betecknas som i alla fall födslovåndan. Och jag vill läsa här ifrån Sakarja bok 12:e kapitlet. Och många bibeltolkare anser ju att Jerusalem är samma sak egentligen som Israel. Det går ju nämligen inte att skilja på Israels huvudstad Jerusalem ifrån landet och folket. Detta är en utsaga som innehåller Herrens ord över Israel. Så säger Herren, han som har utspätt himlen och grundat jorden och danat människans ande i henne. Se, jag ska göra Jerusalem till en berusningens kalk för alla folk runt omkring. Jämväl över Juda ska det komma när Jerusalem blir belägrat. Och det ska ske på den tiden att jag ska göra Jerusalem till en lyftesten för alla folk. Var och en som försöker lyfta den ska illa sarga sig därpå. Och alla jordens folk ska församla sig mot det. Och är det inte det vi ser detta? Och det här sargande, det kan ju vara att man förbannar ju Israel, och då drabbas man ju av förbannelse, säger Bibeln. Så det kan vara det som är naturkatastroferna här. För det står ju om de här skyarna att det är Gud som för fram dem. En är det till ros, va? Står det ju. Och sen en är det till ris, alltså tuktan över olika nationer. Det finns 9 tecken till som vi ska nämna här som hastigast bara på att vi lever i slutet av den här tiden. Antikrists ande är verkligen lössläppt på den här jorden. Och man kallar nu det onda gott och det goda ont. Jesaja 5:20. Det finns samtidigt ett stort vakuum i världen när det gäller ledarskap. Väldigt svagt ledarskap till exempel i USA gör ju att alla andra länder nu vågar sticka upp. Man pressar nu från alla håll för att försöka ta över kontrollen och skapa en världsregering. AI har nått den nivån som gör det möjligt att ta över kontroll av världen faktiskt. Och sen har vi detta då att det avvikande anses nu normalt och upphöjs till en ny norm och är standard. Det pågår alltså en hjärntvätt av våra sinnen genom media framför allt. Och du som är kristen här, läs Romarbrevet 12, 1-2, det är viktigt. Vi ser ett stort avfall ifrån den ursprungliga kristna tron som Jesus och apostlarna predikade i evangeliet. Vi ser samtidigt ett stort kontrollsystem, troligen kontrollerat sedan genom AI, som nu upprättas. Det har ju med det här centralbankernas valuta och blockchain att göra. Och de som inte går in i det här, säger Bibeln, kommer att bestraffas. Vi ser starten på det här kontrollsystemet. Sen ser vi en annan sak som vi lägger märke till. Alla knivdåd och allting som händer över världen. Vi ser alltså hur våldet reser sig upp i land efter land, precis som i Noas dagar. Och nu ska vi titta på ett litet klipp som vi la upp här med James Cadiz, som tittar på ett återuppstått romarrike som nu kanske kan komma fram genom det som sker i Ukraina och NATO. Det kan hända väldiga snabba omkastningar som vi kanske har märkt redan. Ja, hur gick det nu med den här lugna världen som vi hade? Det är inte många år sedan allt har förändrats till fullständig kaos. Det här är andligt, vänner. Var vakna, ha olja i lampan och ha ögonen fästa på det profetiska ordet som Bibeln säger. Gud välsigna er, så hörs vi vidare vid nästa uppdatering. Amen.
We will see a revived Roman Empire. Folks, that may be coming sooner than you think. All right, folks, let's get into this. I have to just say this. Anytime I see stories like this come up, it always gets my attention, and I spend a lot of time looking into it because I know what it actually may result in. I know what it may mean, and I can tell you this, beyond a shadow of a doubt, when you look at stuff like this, you have to do a bit of a second take, because what we are looking at here may very well be signs that we are rushing towards what the Bible tells us is, in essence, a revived Roman Empire. Now, when you look at the book of Daniel, you will see evidence that this is around the corner when we are in the last days. We see pictures of this created for us on a whole bunch of fronts, and it is not very difficult when you study Bible prophecy to know that we are going to look at what will, in essence, be a revived Roman Empire. Now, the way we think this is going to happen, based on what we read in the book of Revelation and a few other places, is that it's going to be some type of a European confederation. Now, some people think it might be the European Union. I think it might be a little bit more involved than that. I think we're looking at what may possibly be the whole world, but in several different regions, 10 regions to be specific, the command structures of which are centralized in Europe. That's what I'm beginning to think a little bit more, at least in my mind. I'm sort of structuring it that way based on what I read in the scriptures. But we are seeing so many things happen that we have not seen any time before that are making me think that we are quickly and rapidly moving in that direction. Now, we've been seeing what's going on with Russia. We've been looking at what's been happening in the Middle East. We've been looking at the type of elements that are beginning to be created within the infrastructure of European nations. We're looking at what's happening in Asia. There's a conglomerate of issues right now that are surfacing that are beginning to draw a picture of a world that is beginning to form very similar to the place that we know we're going to be walking into in the book of Revelation and, of course, in Daniel. And, of course, one of the larger and more significant occurrences that we've seen happen outside of all of the Middle East occurrences is what happened with Russia and Ukraine. Now, I'm certainly not saying that Russia going into Ukraine was some sort of a biblical event that's happening right off the bat, but it certainly is a predecessor to something like that, and it is undoubtedly literally an opportunity here for the theater that needs to be formed for the type of wars we're going to see in the last days, and it is happening beyond any shadow of a doubt. Now, I'm going to talk about why this is such a big deal in just a second, but we need to look at this article first. So let's get into this. The article is entitled Mission Creep. France is deploying soldiers to Ukraine, says Kiev. Okay, let me go through the details of this before I talk about why it is so critical that this is happening, to understand why it's significant, okay? So let's get into this. It says the Ukrainian government praised France's determination for sending military advisors to the country, saying it hoped Paris making the first move would encourage other Western partners to deploy troops too. A months-long drama over French President Emmanuel Macron, apparently intraceable desire to deploy French soldiers directly to Ukraine appears to be approaching to the point of action as Ukraine reveals it has now legally cleared the way for foreign troops to arrive. Folks, I cannot begin to imagine. I can't even begin to tell you how serious of a deal this actually is. If we are talking about avoiding full-scale war, this is not the way to do it. Okay, there's so much to this that we'll have to talk about in just a second, and hopefully this will help us better understand what we're actually looking at, because we are staring down the barrel of something uniquely destructive, something that has the potential to destroy so much that the only viable outcome would be starting over in one way or another. And that start over is going to be the revived Roman Empire. It seems as though we are making the path for this to be the case. Look what it says. Ukraine's new commander-in-chief, Oleksandr Sursky, and the nation's defense minister, Rustem Umerov, had talks with their French counterpart, Defense Minister Sébastien Lecornu. They said on Sunday, underlying how they welcome French troops and appeal to the country for more equipment and ammunition to be donated. I mean, folks, this is so crazy. Look at what the next paragraph says. It says, Sursky said he welcomed France's initiative to send instructors to Ukraine to train Ukrainian military personnel, and revealed he had, quote, already signed the documents that will allow the first French instructors to arrive. That first wave of French troops would be visiting Ukrainian training facilities for familiarization, he said. I mean, guys, this is crazy. Look what it goes on to say. Folks, Sursky went on to say that he hoped France, breaking the Western taboo on boots on the ground in Ukraine, would encourage other backers to get involved more directly. He said, quote, I believe that France's determination will encourage other partners to join this ambitious project. Folks, let me tell you something. You don't want other partners to be encouraged to join this ambitious project, because if they join this ambitious project, they are going to pick a fight with a opposer who is going to kick all of their rears altogether. It goes on to say the timing is unclear, not least because shortly after the statement, Ukraine's defense ministry appeared to offer a soft clarification saying, quote, starting from February 2024, Ukraine expressed interest in the prospect of receiving foreign instructors in Ukraine. As of now, we are still in discussions with France and other countries on this issue. So my guess is what happened was when they started talking about this and they let this slip on purpose, I would assume, France just basically said, hey, you better calm down, because very likely they have not come to an agreement with NATO on how they are going to handle going into Ukraine, because doing this could very much put all of the NATO nations in a massive, massive loophole of problems. Look what it goes on to say. It says, indeed, Defense Minister Umerov said of his part of the conversation that he had urged France to send instructors quickly, implying no concrete timeline had been decided. On other matters, particularly appealing to France to send more weapons, Umerov, strengthening our combat units is essential to repel current attacks and deter potential offenses. We discussed the need for armored vehicles, artillery air defense, and ammunition. I emphasize the importance of quick delivery of weapons, which of course is the same line that Zelensky has been talking about for a long time. It is nothing new. Look what this goes on to say. It says France's defense ministry responded to the statement, confirming that it was a project being worked on, but without absolutely saying it was going ahead immediately. Reuters reported them as having said, As already mentioned, this is the quote, as already mentioned several times, training on Ukrainian soil is one of the projects discussed since the conference on support for Ukraine convened by the President of the Republic on February the 26th. Like all the projects discussed at that time, this track continues to be the subject of work with Ukrainians, in particular to understand their exact needs. It goes on to say a watchword of Western military assistance has been support without escalation, which saw donations limited by some states in the early days of the second invasion, limited to sundries like ration packs and helmets, but not weapons. That position has been slowly ground down, with governments talking themselves into supplying advanced missiles, main battle tanks, and now even jet fighters to Ukraine, each of which was once considered a red line, which, folks, we talked about this, right? These fighter jets are beginning to be delivered to Ukraine, and this whole thing is just absolutely ridiculous. Let me read the next paragraph, because this will launch into what I need to say so that you can better understand why all of this is forming. It says, as reported in February, Macron said sending soldiers to Ukraine could not be ruled out, and that we must do whatever we can to obtain our objective. The revelation was triggered by Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico claiming that NATO leaders were already discussing such plans in private, and that he had seen a restricted NATO document which sends shivers down your spine. Okay, folks, let me tell you what's happening here, because what's taking place is not a good situation. NATO is the main problem here, and I want to bring myself into a very definitive understanding for you, or a discussion with you, so that you can have a definitive understanding over what the real issue is. We went over this. I shared with you an interview with Tucker Carlson on Friday where you were able to understand the bigger issue here, and that's this. When NATO was formed, it was originally formed with the intent to protect all of the Atlantic nations, the nations that run across the Atlantic, from the destructive efforts of Russia, or the USSR. It wasn't even called Russia at the time. When the USSR fell apart, understand that there was a promise that was made that NATO would no longer be expanded. And as a matter of fact, in the early 90s, we know for a fact that Putin, being the president of Russia, actually approached President Clinton and wanted to become a member of NATO himself. Why? Because he has no interest in entering into any type of a warfare type relationship with anybody who's a part of the NATO alliance, and certainly had in his mind the understanding that he would be able to protect the sovereignty of the Russian alliance by being able to preserve where they stand with not only Ukraine, but other nations that surround it. That has not been the case. NATO has been expanding. They broke that promise almost immediately. The United States of America is remarkably complicit in this. As a matter of fact, they may be one of the greatest drivers of this. And the result of the actions of the United States of America, as well as a few other very complicit nations, caused the Russian president to do what he did with his troops a couple of years ago when they entered into Ukraine. We created that situation. It was nobody else. And when that happened, then that gave license to the United States to sort of look just in what they did, and they sanctioned Russia. And of course, by sanctioning Russia, what ended up happening was they made Russia's position even stronger, and they made most of Europe weaker. Now, as Europe has become a lot weaker from a few years ago, they are beginning to act in desperation because their needs are not being met, especially when we start talking about energy consumption, specifically natural gas and oil. They are beginning to panic, and in their panic, they are beginning to make some very, very bad decisions. Here's one great example of this. They all know beyond a reasonable doubt, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that they're not going to be able to win this war with Russia. So why are they getting people involved? Why are they getting NATO nations involved? Why are they beginning to become more aggressive with Russia? Because of the pressure that the United States is placing upon all of these nations. Understand the fact that this is going to backfire. The reason why we know this is going to backfire is because we read in the Bible, when Ezekiel 38 takes place, there's not going to be any superpowers. There will be no nations that will be willing to stand up to Russia, and that is an absolute fact. So what becomes even more scary, or a little bit more distraughtful is that we are beginning to see that very destabilization taking place, especially in Europe. The United States of America is going to become inconsequential as it is. We are accelerating that path of inconsequentiality. We know that that's going to end up happening. But as Europe begins to destabilize, the only viable solution for Europe will be the restructuring of not only their command structures, but the restructuring of their economic structures and the restructuring of anything that relates to how they run government organizations. And what's going to take place is they are going to assemble into super states, and they will become the leaders that determine what the interests of the rest of the world will end up being. Eventually, I think they will organize to the point where they will, for the sake of their own security, they will be willing to give up or capitulate to their powers to somebody else to be able to run their own nations. Their own sovereignty won't even matter. They don't care about sovereignty if they know they can establish security. And as a result, they're going to assemble together as groups or segments where they will have, in essence, for lack of a better term, 10 separate states, and we're going to be talking about 10 separate rulers. And even then, they're going to find out very, very quickly that that will not be enough. And what's going to end up happening is they are going to give their power to one person. We know that that person is the Antichrist. The Bible actually tells us what's going to end up happening when the Antichrist takes that power and does what he does.
Då kan man börja undra om det inte är Gud som håller på och dömer världen i alla fall. Titta på detta fruktansvärda hagelskur och stormar som drar över Italien här på vissa platser. Och man säger även i den här videon att man trodde att ändens tid skulle komma här på ett par timmar.